And we just wanted to welcome you to our webinar, A Wise Approach to Designing Online Courses. My name is Ramin Yasanpana. Here's my dear friend and colleague, Jean-Marc Wise. This session is of benefit to anyone interested in learning more about the instructional design of educational courses for students, as well as professional development courses for teachers, coordinators, and administrators. Jean-Marc and I will discuss an approach that you can apply to designing courses to meet the needs of your learning community. We'll also share examples and provide opportunities for you to practice using the method. So get ready. We educators, especially us as educators, we know the utility of active participation in the learning process. So in this way, we can all deepen our understanding of the content and learn from each other's examples collaboratively. So we ask you to engage just like you're doing right now in the chat. And we just see amazing people from all over Florida, from Uzbekistan, South Carolina. Amazing, okay? Miami, all over the place. So welcome, 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 everybody. So just a few key points. Jean-Marc, if you want to go to the next slide. Just a few key points. If you have a question, please type it into the chat option. Excuse me, please type it into the Q&A option. Okay, so for questions, please type it into the Q&A option. For any kind of engagement or interaction during our chat, or excuse me, during our webinar, we'll be using the chat option. Okay, so feel free to use exclamation points, emojis to express your tone, to express your emotion. So again, we'll be using the Q&A option for questions and the chat dialog box for our interaction. So you'll only be in listen only mode. So the more that we can engage using the Q&A as well as using the chat, the better. Okay, so the amazing, wonderful, beautiful Florida IPDE team has provided this presentation in PDF format on the IPDE website, and a recording will be available within 48 hours for review and sharing. So I'm going to paste the IPDE website for those of you who might not have it. So this is where you can explore many other wonderful webinars for your own professional growth, as well as to share with your professional learning communities. So we sincerely hope that your experience in this webinar contributes positively to your professional growth. And now I would like to hand it off to my friend and my colleague, Jean-Marc.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. So this is a wise approach to online course design, and Ramin and I are very pleased to be presenting this webinar for you, to you, and we look forward to hearing your voices in the chat box here and there when we're asking you to participate. But very briefly, we're going to take a look at the outcomes. So you'll be able to set meaningful goals and define appropriate scope for a course based on a subject matter. So you're developing courses. This is a method that you can use to follow to design these courses. You can determine a clear and correct alignment of course outcomes, objectives, assessments, learning activities, and content. So this is where actually the meat is made, right? Where the sausage is made, so to speak, where we have very clear set objectives, and then those objectives are reflected in the assessments and in the learning activities so that students are guided all the way through and are going to be successful all the way through. You're also going to learn how to use strategies to coordinate and collaborate with contributing stakeholders, create courses that provide a consistent learning experience, and finally, the idea of keeping a documentation and maintaining that documentation of the course so that you can update the course as needed. To get started, I just want to present this model. The method of designing courses comes from a underlying method, the WISE design method, and it's an acronym for defining what you want, what the problem is that you're trying to solve, then conducting an inquiry to analyze the subject matter and the performance context. Then you develop a solution, you solve the problem. In most cases, we're dealing with learning solutions. In some cases, you can apply this method also to solve other problems such as workflow design and these kinds of things. And finally, there is an employment. So you're using what you've designed, you're putting it into place, and that includes looking at it, collecting data about it, and evaluating the effectiveness of it. And finally, you're also going to, have a maintenance component. You're updating your materials every now and then to keep them fresh. So that's the WISE design method. And I've redesigned this to be using more specific language for course design. I'm calling this the WISE design method course edition. And the key words here for these phases are justify, research, design, and teach. And we're going to go through each one of these one at a time and look at what are the steps that are involved in creating a course by following this method. So for justify, the first thing you would do is to make sure that the purpose of your course addresses the learner's needs in a way that it actually addresses what they need to be able to do in real life. So it's not good enough for them to just do something in the classroom and take a successful assessment, but what you really want is to identify a problem that they're solving in real life and then address this by creating a course that teaches them how to deal with this problem. The next thing is you want to identify success criteria. Now, these criteria are criteria that apply to the world. So in this case, what we're looking for is criteria that they might be measured against when they're performing their work tasks, or criteria that they will be used to decide whether they'll be hired for a job or whether they'll be given a particular assignment. So these success criteria can then translate into a course and drive what you are teaching them in the course so that they're successful in real life. We also want to assess their readiness to make sure that the right people are at the right level within our course. And that a lot of times can be done with, all sorts of methods. There could be just conversations, or there could be tests, or these kinds of things that happen. And finally, we want to identify the delta, the difference between where they want to be or need to be with their learning, with their abilities, and where they are now, so that we can classify them correctly in a way that when they take the course, they're not overwhelmed or bored, that are in the right spot. So to determine these differences and determine the individual needs that we might have students in a class with slightly different needs. So now we're going to jump into our sharing. And Ramin is going to go ahead and talk to you about this a little bit with some examples, and put some examples into the chat, and he'll explain how to use the chat when you're participating. Ramin?
All right, thank you, Jean-Marc. So we are going to share several examples. I put justify here just to kind of give us a title for the category that we're going to be discussing. And I'm going to share an example here for number one, to ensure the purpose of the course addresses the learner's needs. I'm also going to paste some other examples here so that align with these numbers. Okay, again, to provide you with some model examples, okay, so that you can also contribute. So we're going to ask you to think about some examples and share some examples to justify, okay, to address this first stage in the WISE method of justify. So I'm going to apply this from something that I'm actually engaged in right now, that we're engaged in, and we're developing a professional development course for AGE literacy teachers. So the number one here that I posted here to ensure the purpose of the course addresses the learner's needs is actually conducting a needs analysis questionnaire to get input from key stakeholders. So this is something that we developed and distributed to, this needs analysis questionnaire to actually just get input from these key stakeholders, right? About what are the purposes, right? What are their needs? And once we kind of can understand this, this helps us to develop course outcomes that align with the needs expressed by the stakeholders. It also allows us to begin to assess student readiness, right? By asking teachers to share their years of experience, their teaching in general, teaching literacy, specifically. And then we also begin to determine differences in individual needs by asking adult literacy teachers to describe what their needs, challenges, and goals are regarding the teaching of adult literacy. We posted some other examples here. So again, to address that first point, another example is a course teaching literacy skills to adults aligns with their needs to be able to communicate in everyday life, right? So that can ensure the purpose of the course is aligned with the needs of students who are studying literacy, right? The second one here, the ability to read and understand a leasing agreement and communicate about it with a landlord in writing. So that is a good example of the second point there, to describe how you measure what the successful learner will be able to do after completing the course. And three, a student is currently able to read or write at any level. This is to ensure that the target learners have the necessary kind of prerequisites. Is that on point there, Jean-Marc?
Yeah, I mean, it could also be not able.
All right,
Right?
or not able.
Uh,
All right.
Absolutely.
So these are just some examples, okay, that we're sharing with you. Again, we encourage you to think about, how you could address, some of these kind of points here for justifying the needs of the course, right? So you can do that now, you can do that later, but these are some examples of how, it could be done and how we're actually applying it ourselves in our work. So Jean-Marc, do you want to just kind of keep going here?
Sure, and please feel free, everybody who's participating. It's be great to have your input as well. So feel free at any point to kind of address either any of these items here with some examples of your own, if you have those. And in the meantime, I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is basically just summarizing the idea of these examples. We have various possibilities here, but the idea really is for us to make sure that we're creating courses that address needs in real life. So in this case, the literacy. And when we create these criteria, we want to create the criteria in a way that they relate to real life. So for example, with this lease agreement, that's a practical example of how what they learn in a course will then later be utilized in life. And then, assessing the student readiness. Some students are able to read at any level. Other students are not able to read at a certain level. We can assess these by using, all sorts of exams, tests, quizzes, or entry-level exams, placement exams. These kinds of things can be used to do that. And then finally, we've got, the differences, the individual differences that we can determine in class to make sure that we're challenging the students appropriately and not overwhelming them. So that would be the first phase, justify. And now we have basically a justification for us to create a course, and we have the parameters that we need about the learners to know where the course is going. The second phase would be research, and that starts by mapping goals, knowledge, skills, abilities. So basically what you need to do there is you want to determine what precisely you're going to teach within the course. And there has to be a scope. You can't try to teach everything. You gotta determine based on the available time and what the needs are. You're going to determine what they need to learn. Then you have characteristics of teachers and students. So you want to know who are the students who are coming to this class. Are they busy? Do they have families? We're dealing with adults here, so there are all sorts of competing requirements and needs that they have in life. and we need to be aware of those. We also need to be aware of who the teachers are. We might need to create teachers handouts for the teachers or guidelines for the teachers to make sure that whoever's teaching the course we're designing is going to deliver the course in a similar manners for consistency. The third step would be to look at the learning and life environments. So are we online? Are we in a classroom? Are we preparing them for something that happens in life? And are there certain circumstances? So, for example, if we're teaching them how to use a particular tool, we want to make sure that that tool is available to them as the tool that they're using. Or when they're learning how to drive, is it an automatic car or a manual car, shifting gears? That's important. So we need to make sure that we're aware of what they will need in real life and provide those circumstances to them in our design so that they can learn it the right way. And then you have to write outcomes and objectives. So the outcomes are basically what students or participants will take away from the course. The objectives are specific directions that describe what they're having to do and under what circumstances they're having to engage in certain activities and assessments. So that's where these statements come from. The statements come from knowing what the goals and knowledge, skills, abilities are, knowing who they are, and in what circumstances they're going to need those skills. That's how you know what to write with respect to the outcomes. So if we go again into our chat, Ramin will just show you a few examples from his part, and then also, as we prompted you earlier, we would appreciate it if you could kind of like participate and type in a few examples of your own, maybe type in an objective or type in a description of a student or something like that, so that others can see that too. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Marc. All right, so this is a fun part here, right? Because we're researching, we're investigating, we're kind of gumshoeing, right? To kind of find questions, to ask questions, to engage with people, and to understand, right, what their needs are. So I'm sharing this example here again from my current project of developing a adult general education literacy professional development course. So addressing number one, determine what specifically you will teach your learners for this course. And so one such example are these adult literacy standards, right, for different ESL and ABE reading levels. So that's something that learners from a professional development course on adult literacy would need to know. And that then kind of connects with number four, okay, write at least one course outcome and two objectives. I just wrote one objective for this, but the course outcome can be, apply the Florida Adult Education Curriculum Framework, right, and matrices to the planning of adult literacy courses. So that could be an outcome there. It's applying that what we determined that the learners taking this professional development course would need to know. And we want them to kind of use that framework and those matrices to identify the reading levels and standards, right, of their adult literacy students. So that's an important skill that our participants in this professional development course would need. So let me share some other examples here for you or with you. And so let me put it here in the chat. So here's some other examples. Jean-Marc, do you want to talk about a couple of these?
Sure, I'll go ahead and actually for this, I'm just going to pull up the slide, and then we can return to the chat in a minute. So that people who are watching the video afterwards can see what we're talking about. So basically, when we're talking about this context of literacy, one of the goals is that we want the students to be able to read and communicate about, for example, articles that they read in a newspaper, right? So that could be a specific goal, and that also kind of determines a little bit kind of like the level that we're aiming for. And with that, we could then assess whether there are any particular needs for individual students that might be enrolled in the course, whether they're in the right place. A description of a student could be an adult student who has a job and a family and limited time for learning. And that information is important for us to know because, for example, we may not want to load too much homework onto our students in general, so that those students who fall into this category are not at a disadvantage and feel overwhelmed by the course. An example for number three, the learning and life environments. The life environment could be an online job that requires mainly written communication. So if that's the environment, and we're talking about writing emails back and forth or participating in chat sessions and things like that, then we can create a course that uses these kinds of examples so that the examples are relevant and make sense for the student, and then it's easier for the student then to translate what they've learned in the course into their online environment when they're on the job. And finally, an example of an outline of an outcome, or actually this is an objective, right? Given an email announcement, the learner is able to summarize in writing the essence of the message in his or her own words, right? So that would be one way that we could formulate a objective, and we could then say we're going to teach them how to do that in a lesson, and we're going to create an assessment where they are prompted to actually read a message and then write a summary of that message or pull out the essence and describe it in writing. And that would then be an alignment of the activity with the assessment. Okay, Ramin, we have a minute here. Do you want to go ahead and kind of look through the chat a little bit to see whether there's some examples we want to point out that people have posted?
Nobody has posted anything, but I want to ask a question here, maybe to elicit some participation. I just want to ask you all for this research, where could you find kind of information, right, that addresses these aspects of research, right? Who could you talk to? What resources could you utilize in order to determine what you want to teach, right, to your learners in your courses? What could be some resources that you utilize in this research? What kind of people, right? Who are the stakeholders? Thank you, Raheem. Okay, so we have teachers, professors. So there we go. So now we're engaging with teachers and professors. We're asking them, right? What is needed, right? What does this group of learners need? Thank you, Lisa. The learners themselves. Okay, so talking to learners. So many times I see that is not addressed, especially when things are coming from the top down. This is a bottom up approach, right? Asking the learners themselves, what are their needs? What are their challenges? And start from there. You have websites, right? Whether they be college websites, whether they be, state, department websites, as Josephine mentioned. Other teachers, other educators, get their perspectives, get their input, right? Sherzad, open education resources. Absolutely. There's just so much, so many amazing resources out there that are open education resources. There's no paywall, there's no subscription. They're just there for us to use. Diana says, having an intake form, right? Use placement test results. All of this is content that informs us, okay, in our research as we are, designing a course that is exactly what you all are getting at here, that is addressing the learner's needs, right? That is addressing also best practices, okay, in the field, whatever that content would be. Here, we're talking about, adult, education. So it'll be specific to that. So these are all great examples that you all provided. June says here, looking at the student intake processes and portfolios. So great interaction. Thank you all. You got it. And so, one thing also, Jean-Marc, I wanted to say is, as just listening to you here, this also serves as a great, just like, checklist, right? As we are kind of, engaging, right, in the design and planning of course design.
That's right.
Using this, right? And using this as a checklist, having conversations like we're having right now with colleagues to answer these questions.
Right. And my background is in instructional design, evidently, as some of you may have guessed. And, these are concepts that are all over that people have talked about in different contexts and highlighting different aspects of these processes. And the reason why I decided to kind of summarize it this way is because I felt that lots of models that are out there kind of only look at one particular aspect or focus on certain pieces and parts, but don't always take into consideration the whole picture. So I felt like that might be helpful to have a different perspective that summarizes these steps. So the third phase would be the design phase, in which you first go ahead and construct your assignments and exams. So you're basically, these are assessment instruments, right? And a lot of times teachers wait till the last moment, sometimes even, to create a quiz, and it's like, oh my goodness, I still have to write a few questions for an exam, etc. When in reality, it actually makes most sense to first start with, after the objective is written, you kind of figure out, how am I going to test for that? How am I going to know whether the learner has been able to reach this objective and to what degree? And then having that will give you enough guidance to say, and now how do I teach them how to do that? How do I teach them to be successful in this assessment? A lot of times when you don't do it that way, your assessment might test for something else than what you're actually looking for in the course, what you're teaching them. The second step within design would be to kind of come up with a course structure. You could call it an outline or a breakdown of what happens in the course. And for the most part, this includes, activities and also various other components that basically just describe the journey of the learner through this material, through these outcomes, to reach the outcomes of the course. And then you go ahead and develop content. You write some text. You maybe record some videos or podcasts, or you link to different resources. You might be using extracts from textbooks, etc., to basically support your teaching of these objectives. And once you've taught them, you can go ahead and then assess the learners. And then the last piece of the design would be to think about the overall student experience. And, that would have to do with, first of all, like, are they coming to a classroom? Are they doing this online? Is it kind of like a blended environment, but both things sort of happen? One thing happens online, another thing happens in class. Are there little small groups that you're using that maybe are driving the entire experience? Where does the student enter? What are the different places where the student can access resources, etc.? So this is the overall experience that students have when they come through the course. So this is the design. These are different aspects of design, and we're going to jump into some examples for this as well. So I'll hand it over to Ramin for that.
All right. Thank you, Jean-Marc. Okay, so design, this is the creative, fun part of creating our course, right? So I just want to ask you all, as far as design, and you can address any of these 4 points that Jean-Marc just explained, but think about it, and you can post these in the chat. What's an activity that allows you to assess students' performance, right? What is one that you already might utilize? What is one that you haven't maybe utilized but you would like to utilize? So maybe post that in the chat so we can see what those might be. Monica is right on it with the games, lesson quizzes. So gamification is really an excellent way to assess learning in a fun, engaging way, through these kinds of, as Jesus says, through lesson quizzes. I'm going to post here this next one here, and you can keep them coming. And then maybe let's think about number 2. So divide the content into appropriate portions and decide what students will be asked to do. So just thinking about how you would, group certain learning, right, together. It can be in kind of modules. It can be in units. What would be an appropriate way to design things? And let me just ask you, how do you group your instruction? right? Do you group them under kind of like topics? Do you group them? There you go, Jesus. We're on the same page. Okay. What are some other ways that you might group them? Grammar concepts. Thank you, Gladys. Okay. So grammar concepts focused by task, cards. Okay. So this is kind of addressing both of those, right? One and two. How you're going to group, and then how are you going to kind of assess, which makes sense. Okay, great. All right, let's look at number 3. So write instructions and worksheets, record messages and lectures. And when I think about this, I think about universal design, right? How to make things accessible to our students, how to make them usable, how to make them as inclusive as possible. So let me ask you, in what ways do you provide content, especially with in my professional development courses, as well as courses with my adult ESOL students. I have found that providing good model examples, right, of things is so important, right? Explaining things in diverse and different ways, visually, textually, through video, through audio, right, through model examples. So let me ask you, how do you write instructions, worksheets? What do you use in the design to make it to where your students can access it, can understand it in these kind of different, diverse ways? So let me hear you on the chat if you can share some of your advice with us. How do you ensure clarity and good design in your instruction? And then finally, decide how students will access and navigate through the course. If this is an online course, for example, or even if it's a blended course where you're mixing so much of good design in courses now is taking advantage of, in-class kind of activities as well as online activities, right? Synchronous activities, live face-to-face, as well as asynchronous, where you allow students to engage at their own pace. So Jesus says, try to use clear, concise language. And thank you, Jesus, for bringing that up with language. So much as especially myself as an ESOL educator, language is what it's all about, right? And understanding our audience's ability to understand what language we're using is so important. How we're delivering that and what kind of support, visual support, especially that we can provide in the comprehension of that language. Gladys says that to use video recording demos. Yes, okay, so post for students to check either instructions for a specific task, a visual example to complete a task at home. That's right on, Gladys.
So yeah, so these examples that we have listed are very plentiful and go all over the place. I really liked the mentioning of games because, games are actually a way for us to kind of combine the learning experience with an assessment, with ongoing assessment. We also sometimes call that stealth assessment. Students don't even realize that they're being assessed while they're playing a game, and there are statistics being tallied behind the scenes that will decide then, how much more challenging the next screen or the next level of the game will be. Another quick word on defining course structure. A lot of times we're going to choose something about the content to define that. For example, here, number 2, we have 4 modules because we deal with reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And that makes a lot of sense that we would choose modules based on, the groupings of topics. Another way of doing this, however, would be to look at a process, for example, and decide to design the course in a way that the modules follow steps throughout the process. So if we were to design a course that does what we're doing here in this webinar, we might have 4 modules, for the 4 phases, and then in each of the modules you would have units. For example, here in the design module, we'd have a unit that deals with how to construct assignments and exams. Another unit would deal with how to define the course structure and choose the appropriate activities, etc. So that would be another way of dealing with this.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Just before we move on, I just want to acknowledge a couple of more posts here in the chat. Sherzad says that providing a clear overview of course information at the get-go, making sure everyone's on the same page, that the rationale is there, is so important. And I would say even, not just at the beginning of the class or the introduction, but on a daily and weekly basis, right, is so important. Gladys shares a tool that she uses, Socrative, as a quick quiz to assess knowledge and understanding. So all kinds of apps and tools out there that we can integrate. And so yes, awesome. Thank you for those contributions. I just wanted to read those out loud for those who might be viewing this later and can't see the chat.
Excellent. So let's move on. We're going to get to the last phase here, teach. So that's where it actually all happens, where the rubber meets the road. We're going to implement what we've designed. So we're going to teach that course. And it could be online, or it could be face-to-face, or any of these ways. And while you're doing that, be a good idea to keep notes and kind of like diary a little bit what's been happening, especially if it's the first time you're teaching a particular course. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. You all probably know all about that. Collecting grades and feedback is important. A lot of times when we're using these learning management systems, a lot of that is being done for us, and we can then later go back and analyze it and see, how well did they do on certain assignments, and that could give us an idea of how well we did in introducing and teaching those topics and skills and the knowledge that we're testing in these assignments and assessments. At some point, it's good to evaluate the course. A lot of times, you'll have to run it a couple of times before an evaluation truly makes sense. And when you do the evaluation, it is important not just to stay within the course itself, but then also try to follow up with those who have taken the course a while back and kind of check in with them and see whether they have landed a job, whether they've been successful at the job, whether they feel like there's been an improvement, whether they have gotten to a higher level of where they were before they took the course. Professional development, that's the point, right? The point is for us to develop our skills so that we can move up and do more demanding jobs or assignments within a particular job. And finally, it's important to maintain the course, and that means that we need to keep up with any changes. Sometimes when we put hyperlinks to resources online, these things break because people move things around or delete them. So we got to keep an eye on that, and every time before we teach the course, it'd be good to run through it and see whether things are still working. It's also good to stay current, so kind of update examples perhaps to reflect certain current events or anything that has been newly discovered in the field, and that sort of thing. So this includes the documentation that is so important to maintain, so that you can also go back and make changes and teach others how to teach the course.
Okay.
One last time, please participate, and Ramin is going to share a few examples.
So teach, come on. We're teachers here, okay? We got this. But I will say that this brings up some really good points here, okay? So while teaching the course, plan on keeping notes about what worked and what didn't. It's so easy to end the class and just kind of move on, right? But I think it's really important to take a moment to reflect, okay? To take a moment to write down on what worked and what didn't, okay? And that can be just our own kind of like short journaling. We can make a routine, a habit of it. We can even do this with our students, right? Engage them in a short kind of exit ticket or a short kind of journal prompt of what worked for you today. What are you struggling with? What do you hope, to kind of improve and do better, or more of next time? So this is something that is about kind of having a reflective teaching practice, and then also encouraging students to kind of have a reflective, learning practice, right? That can be shared, that can be kept to themselves. But engaging this is just one extra little step, and it really doesn't take long. It can just take 2 to 5 minutes, but it's so powerful to engage in this way. And the second point here, analyze the results of assessments, conduct student feedback surveys. This is I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, Jean-Marc, but you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But because preaching to the choir really reinforces best practice, okay? And so, you know, when we conduct student feedback surveys, I'll say oftentimes we think of feedback surveys maybe at the end of the course. I'll say that, you know, I try to encourage feedback um, on either a weekly basis or at the end of a module or a unit. Okay. Again, this is engaging students to provide feedback to me as the instructor, as well as to ask students to reflect on their own learning, to then set goals moving forward, right? So these are all things that we can engage in ourselves as educators, and that we can model and encourage our students to apply in their learning, right? The other points here, like you know, evaluate students' ability to reach individual objectives as well as the course outcomes. This is so important, you know, as you know, on a formative basis for assessment for learning, right? And for summative assessment or you know, assessment of learning. And so this kind of formative assessment is something that we can do, you know, constantly, right? At the classroom level, on the daily level, at the weekly level. And again, this can be assessment that's done collaboratively between students themselves, between students and teachers, to have students kind of reflect on their own, you know, meeting the objectives. So these are all things that don't necessarily need to come in a kind of punitive way, but in a kind of process-oriented way. And lastly, fix broken links, revise assessments. I will say that this kind of ties back to also number one. And this is where, you know, we're keeping notes, right? About what needs to be addressed, what needs to be added, and making note of it. Because I know I'm not the only one here. It's so easy to forget. It's so easy to lose things, you know, in the clutter of life. So taking the time to just kind of note things down, having that as a process approach to our teaching, to our evaluation, and to our maintenance, you know, of our course is so important. So I'm going to put some other examples here under teach, but I'm also looking here at the chat. So we have here, you know, Steven says, you know, sounds exactly like the IB learner profiles. Okay, well, please share more about that. I'm curious about that. Diana, you know, using exit interview forms. Rahim is saying, you know, yes, this is so important. You know, love that we're discussing this content. Gladys is saying, check the student's overall understanding, demonstration of knowledge. Gladys uses short self-assessment checklists. Yes. Students check what they think they've mastered and what they need to work on or improve. I love that, Gladys. Gladys collects the self-assessment checklist and modifies content based on students' responses. She does this at the end of each lesson or new content. Gladys, oh my goodness, you're amazing. All right, that's all just excellent andragogy at work.
There's an interesting comment from Rahim here about you know, the motivation of students to be in class, using an example of teaching in prisons. And that's very interesting, you know, to see that there are all sorts of other components. And that's why it was so important for us in the inquiry phase, while we're doing our research, to also research who our learners are and who will be teaching, right? So this is kind of like where this comes into play. And the importance is that we design experiences for our learners that are relevant to them. And they could also be fun. There's nothing wrong with fun, as long as the fun is tied in with actually learning something that is important to them, that is part of what they need in order to move on in life. Or, you know, when we're dealing with these people who are in prison, they might need to learn something that they can use immediately, not just after they get released from prison. So there, it takes a little bit of creative work, and maybe also involvement of the people who are participating in these classes, to say, you know, have a discussion about where their needs are in terms of what they're learning.
That's right. Well said, Jean-Marc. And also, making it very clear of how you're taking their feedback, their input, what you're considering their needs directly in the activities that you're utilizing. So, as you're doing activities, as you're presenting activities, always pointing back to that needs assessment, always pointing back at how clearly drawing the line of how the activities are addressing their needs as stated by them, right? And those can change. Those can change over time. Those can change week by week. And there's nothing wrong with that. Raheem, just off the top of my head, you mentioned something about, emotions and mental health issues. A lot in the field of education is dealing with things like social emotional learning, right? Nonviolent communication. So these are kind of things that you can integrate, right? That can be your research as far as like research and resources that can be integrated to meet the needs and the challenges of your learners. Okay. Thank you, Raheem. I really love those really challenging questions, right? Because they inspire everyone here to think about how can we address these challenges that adult learners are facing, right? And we know it's possible, but we have to address their needs immediately in order to sustain their interest, their motivation, and really just kind of support their persistence, in learning. Because when you're learning, especially when you're learning language, when you're learning academic skills to the level that they need to really thrive in society, it takes time, it takes persistence, it takes confidence, it takes support. So all of these things that we're talking about, address the needs that we have at the emotional level, right? We that is at the heart of this, right? Is to address what our needs are at that level, and then when we can address those things, it really helps to provide intrinsic motivation that's needed for sustained learning.
Very good. So let me just give you a quick review of this method here. And this is basically a way for you to do the planning, but also a way for you to structure documents that you might write about a course. If you have all these elements within your documentation, you can later go back and relate back to them, just like Ramin was saying about the success criteria that will later be evaluated. So when we're looking at number 2 here for under justify, the success criteria of how am I succeeding in life after I've completed the course. And that's what we're looking at when we're evaluating the course. We're interested in going back to the original needs and say, have we made a difference with respect to these needs? The idea of creating this documentation and answering various aspects and writing about various aspects will lead to a document that you can refer back to and you can use to update your course and tweak it and make changes to it. But you can also use it in order to hand off the course to somebody else who might take over for you in a particular capacity. You can use it to create documents that are guides for the instructors who will be teaching courses. If you're not the only one teaching the course, then that could be very helpful. And this is the encouragement that you have with this. The other thing is if you're using this method again and again, and different people are using the method, you're going to have a framework that you can use for communication about courses. Say, can we have a meeting about how we're going to evaluate these courses within our program? And so the evaluations are going to be consistent across the board. Or the student experience, number 4 under design, right? We want the student experience to not just be successful within one course, But we do want students to have a consistent experience, especially if there are multiple courses within a program that students will follow. So that these are all points that are important. And like Ramin was saying about a checklist, right? This could be, in essence, a checklist that you can look at. Have I thought about all of these aspects? And some of them require more work, and some of them can be done more quickly. So this will give us an opportunity now also for you to ask some questions via the chat about the subject matter, about what we've discussed here. If you have any, or if you have additional input, additional ideas, you can still type them into the chat right now. And when things trickle in, we can discuss these points that you're making within the chat.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Just want to come back over to the chat. Just Gladys just added that she uses social emotional components at the beginning of each lesson, using Pear Deck to check students' state of mind when coming into the class, including pictures where they can drag icons where students show if they're feeling sad, happy, ready to learn, just kind of expressing where they're at the beginning of the class. She also says that students care so much when their teacher shows interest in their emotional mind state. I couldn't agree with you more, Gladys. I actually, those of you who are in my professional development courses and maybe have seen some webinars, I'm a big advocate for using mindfulness activities, focusing on well-being in coursework in order to allow participants to focus on just relaxing, to get on, a state where they feel comfortable to envision what their goals are, feel comfortable with themselves and each other to share those goals. All these kinds of ways of addressing the emotional, growth mindset, let's say, right, as well. Being open to taking risk, being open to providing constructive, positive feedback and receiving constructive feedback is all so important. Sherzad say, can you share with us more articles about the WISE design approaches and methods? Any links? Do you want to go to the next slide there, Jean-Marc? If you would like to contact either one of us, thank you, Jean-Marc. And if you want to just go to the next slide there, we encourage you to just connect with us. Connect with us here through our websites, through our emails, through LinkedIn, all of the above. As you can see, a big purpose of these IPDAY webinars is also for us to connect, to share, to exchange, right? So I encourage all of you to stay engaged. I just want to applaud you for being here, for investing the time and energy and the participation. I mean, amazing participation, right? That, as you can see, has helped to guide our discussion here today as well. So continue doing that. And if you want to connect with us at any time, we're here for you. We both love what we do in this field. So again, please connect with us. So you see here a poll. Please provide, speaking of feedback, please provide us with your feedback. So you can go to the next slide there, please, Jean-Marc. And just to let you know, on January 23rd, there is the next Tech Tuesday, and it's unlocking the power of ChatGPT to enhance adult ESOL instruction. So if you haven't heard about something called, ChatGPT, AI, this is something that you might want to attend, check out, see how it relates to your instruction. Again, these are all tools that we can integrate and hopefully that align potentially with the needs of your teacher, of your students, right? As well as potentially tools that you can share with your colleagues. Okay, everybody, thanks for the love over here in the chat. Thank you all for being here. And we look forward to connecting with you at some point soon. All the best.
Thank you very much. Yes. Appreciate everybody being here and your participation and your feedback.
Thank you, Jean-Marc.
Thank you, Ramin.